Can you still hear me? Now that I've changed the screen? All right. Sorry about that. We'll carry on. We didn't get very far. I was talking about the inquiries screen. And I guess I'll double back. SMMware allows you to set a client representative in case your client has something like early Alzheimer's or something like that. If this is a client representative you already worked with before, then they will be on this list, perhaps. If it's a client family member, then probably not. You can click on this plus side. It will generate a pop-up window where you can enter the contact's information. There's also a field for the representative's relationship, whether it's an adult, child, attorney, etc. This list is customizable. We have a field for whether they act as a reference. It's a little bit too early at this point, but this field carries over to being a client. And I'd like to point out this field for setting a color. That's used for the calendar. And we'll be talking about that in our third track, but for now I just wanted to point out that this is one of the places that you can set a color. In terms of people who refer business to you, SMMware provides 3 fields. The first one here, category, is meant to be the most general. And working your way down to the middle layer is company, and the most granular is person. So you might have the category might be real estate, the company might be Smith Realty, and the person might be Amy Jones as the realtor, something like that. There are custom fields. There's actually 12 of them, but we're hiding 2 of the rows because it's not in use. These are fields where you can have a label as you like. It's not necessarily radio buttons and drop downs and things like that, but you can use this for information about the client or inquiry, such as if they need a mobility aid, things like that. But down below there's something called the status board, and you can set this lead as being a cold lead, medium lead, hot lead, and then there's a description that you can provide more detail. And one of the ways in which SMMware is customized for senior move managers is if you work with a number of senior living centers, then we can arrange to have this drop down populated with those addresses. And when you pick one, it will pre-fill out all the address information for you. And you just have to put in Suite 5C or something like that. Down below there's a file manager. And we can also add tasks, notes, and calls. We'll be going into those a little bit later. For now, I'll just point out that they are there. And when this inquiry gives you work, you can promote them to be a client. And if they do not, you can change this to be declined. Let's go ahead and take a look at the clients. This is the client list. At the top of the page, there is a filter, which is common across a lot of the screens in SMMware. A gray bar, it's got the filter button, reset, and the various fields where you can set different options. And if we take a look at one of these profiles, you can see it's the same fields that we saw at in the inquiry. Once they've given you the work, then you can create a job for them. SMMware does separate the idea of the job from the client because you may have more than one job going for that client, either over time or even at the same time. Looking at the client's profile, this line says jobs for this client, and next to that you have one button for each of the jobs, and you can click on that as a shortcut to get to the job. In the main menu, there's an area where you can go to look at the listing of jobs, find the right job, open it for editing. But if you're already on the client profile, a quick way to get there is to click on the job button. And once you are here, if you need to go back to the client, up here we have the client's name, and next to that is a button that takes you back to the client's profile. Within a job, we have a job type. This list can be customized for your needs. This is meant to be a short phrase where you are talking to another senior move manager and you want to describe what you're doing in a short phrase. So you can say, well, we did an estate clean out for the Smith family, or we did a downsize for the Jones family. But if you have, if your work tends to be more of a mix of everything, so that it doesn't really fall into a neat category, we can have a just a generic move management services job type. We also have a job status, active, closed, a few others. SMMware allows you to set a team lead for a job. And here we can also set a color. Again, that's used for the calendar. And once again, we have custom fields. In the case of the job, we have 28 custom fields. We're only showing 3 of the rows, and the rest are hidden because we're not using them. And the difference between how you might use a custom field for a job versus a client, the custom fields for a job would be something that is true about the home. So for instance, an elevator code or which day the garbage comes. And the custom fields for a client would be more like I said before, the mobility aid, if they have pets, things like that. And we also have a status board notes section here. And in this case, you can set the flags to alert, flag, and good. These values are customizable, so you can have 5 instead of 3. You can have different labels. And there's actually colors associated with those labels, which we'll see later on down the line. Within SMMware, you can charge your clients in one of 2 ways. If you charge the same amount of money, the same hourly rate, regardless of the type of work being done, then we call that, I'm going to go ahead and start a new job so I can show you. So if you're using the same rate regardless of the task type, then that is referred to as being per job rate. If you are, and then you can set that rate up here in the right under the hourly rate field. But if you want to charge a different amount of money for, depending on the task type, it might be because you charge a different rate for the owner versus the regular employees. Maybe you charge a different rate based on packing versus floor plans, things like that. Then you can set it to use job codes. And if you are using job codes, you can then set a discount. So each one of these job codes has a rate associated with it. And when you set a discount, that discount is applied to those base rates across the board. I'm going to open up one of these existing jobs just because I want to upload some files. I'd like to demonstrate the file manager. We have 2 of them for both jobs and for clients. One of them is restricted, and you can upload things here which are meant for managers only. So it could be an estimate or something like that. On the other hand, we have this regular file manager, which is meant for things that any of the SMMware users can see. This might be images, photos taken in the kitchen and the bedroom, and so on and so forth. You can upload Word docs, Excel files, PDFs, and things like that, as well as images. So I'll go ahead and upload a couple. As you can see, you can multi-select, and that is true on a mobile device as well. And again, going to the idea of walking into a room and taking a bunch of photos and uploading them, we have a tag. So let's say you took these 3 photos in a kitchen, and you tag it as having come from the kitchen. I should mention that this list is customizable for your needs as well. So first you pick the photos, then you select the tag, and then finally you go ahead and hit the upload button. And there they are. And as they are being uploaded, they are downsized. So a typical camera on a phone these days will take a 3 megabytes or so photograph. And when you're out in the field later on, you want to look at 30 or so photographs. That would be 90 megabytes. But SMMware downsizes these photos as they're being uploaded to something around 100 kilobytes. And they still look very good, plenty of detail. And at 100 kilobytes, that's a lot quicker to get down to your phone when you're out in the field than the 3 megabytes per photo was. Looking at the file manager, you can rotate the photos, you can edit them to change the name, you can change the tag, and you can see who uploaded the photo and when. there's a filter so that if you have photos from the different rooms, you can say, all right, show me the ones from the kitchen, show me the ones from the bedroom, and so on. So far, we just uploaded 3 photos from the kitchen. And if we change to one of the other filters, then we won't see anything. Moving on from here, I'd like to show you how to enter hours and expenses. Because I'm logged in as an administrator, I have this drop-down, which lets me pick which employee to enter time on behalf of. If I was a basic level user, I would not have that drop-down. When you're entering hours, you can put in the date. You select a job. This particular system is set up to enter time based on start time and end time, and it also allows for break time. So if we work, say, 5 or 6 hours, and we take a morning break, and then we take a lunch break, and it adds up to 1.25 hours, we can put that there. So if you take more than one break, we still only have one break field, and you just put in the sum total. Next to that, we have the miles field. So if you do pay employees based on the miles traveled as opposed to time, then you can enter a value here. Next to that is the description. You can type in whatever you want, but we also offer a button that pops up a list of predefined terms. And as is the case throughout SMMware, when we offer you something like that, a predefined term, you can still modify it from there. So it's meant to be a shortcut and not like a drop-down where there are limited options. And after you've finished the information, you can just go ahead and hit save. I'd like to point out that you can have more than one row. So if you work on one job in the morning and another in the evening, or in the afternoon, you can enter both of those from one screen. You don't have to handle one of them and then repeat the process as needed. So we enter the information and hit save. Coming back to the screen, you can see existing entries are down here. And you can edit and delete them from there. You can do that until they are part of an invoice. Moving on to look at expenses, it's pretty much the same situation, except now, once you have picked a date and a job, this time we'll be putting in amounts. Now, going back to the hours entry, what I forgot to mention was that the other option is to enter the hours in a single field where you put in the grand total hours. So instead of start time, end time, and break time, you could just put in 5 hours. Once again, we have a description field with some preset terms. From here, I'll go to look at something called flat fees. So within a given job, what we looked at so far, the hours entry, was a question of a formula where there's number of hours times a rate to come up with a subtotal for that line item. But sometimes you have fees that are, for instance, administrative fees. A lot of senior move managers may charge, say, $50 for every day that workers are on site to cover the support costs back at the main office. So we can use a predefined flat fee, which again you can have customized for you. In this case, an administrative fee of $50. And picking one of these, in this case, generates both the description and the fee. And as I said before, you can modify those after using the pre-selection. And you'll also enter a date for these, as well as, of course, the job. From here, we'll go ahead and take a look at invoices. Coming over to the administrative menu and going down to the invoice manager, we will see a list of invoices. We have a filter across the top. So once you have a lot of invoices, you may want to narrow down the list using that filter. Or you can create a new invoice from here. You select the job and then click on New Invoice. For now, we're going to look at an existing invoice. There are two basic types of invoices within SMMware, itemized and flat fees. This one is itemized. An invoice has multiple status levels. When you first create the invoice, you can give it a status level of preliminary. And the reason for this to exist is so that you can indicate to other people in the company that they should not do anything with it. You don't send it off to the client. And also within SMMware, the idea is that team leaders, since they were on site and they know which workers were there and what kind of work was done, they're in the best position to approve an invoice. So they may not form it up, but then they can come and take a look at it. And after they approve it, it has the status level of team lead approved. We also have a few other statuses: sent to client, overdue, paid. After the invoice has been approved, and I'm just going to roll this back to show you what it looks like finalized. When it's not yet team lead approved, you can edit the descriptions for all the line items. The thinking here is that if your employees were not clear in their descriptions, then you can tweak them to make them more readable en masse. So instead of having to go back to all the individual line items one at a time, track down the right item, make the change, and then repeat for all the line items involved, you can modify any one of the descriptions from here. We also have a drop down for addresses, because sometimes you have to send the invoice to the home that they are currently living in. Sometimes you have to send it to the new address, and they're both here, and they are marked. If there is a client representative, their address would also be part of the drop down, and picking it would also give you the care of field filled in. We have a couple of notes fields, one for things that you don't want the client to see, and the other one that the client will see. One of the uses for the more public note is if you have broken something and you come to an agreement on the price. Say in this case a vase was broken and you agreed on $50. Then you can put in a note to explain that here. And the $50 is removed down in the grand total area. But again, this is a finalized invoice. I'll go ahead and approve it. Just clicking on the approve button. So even though the team leads are envisioned as approving it, as an administrator, I can do that too. And once it is approved, then you have these buttons, which are generating PDFs and can send that PDF as an email. SMMware offers 3 different formats for the invoice. The summary version is the simplest, and it does not have line items on a day-by-day basis. It just has one line item for grand totals for categories like labor and expenses. Moving on from there, we have the detailed version. In this case, if you have multiple employees on site on the same day, each one of them will have a line item. So this invoice can get fairly lengthy. Some clients like that, and some do not. Some prefer a shorter version. And for that case, where you want a shorter version, we have something called the roll-up format. And in this case, if multiple employees are working on the same day, their line item will just or that day will just have one line item with the number of associates and the grand totals. The description of the work done comes from the team lead. All right, I think that's a good introduction to the invoice system. And that brings us to the end of our first track. Again, we've talked about sales leads and how they become clients, about creating jobs, entering hours and expenses, and then working with invoices. From here, we'll move on to track 2, organizations and contacts. And again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them as they come up. Looking at the organizations section, it starts off in a categorized view. You can open up any one of these categories to look at the individual entries. I'd also like to point out that you can export the listing as a comma-separated variable format file using the export button. If you don't have any of these checkboxes marked, then you'll get everything in the system. And once you start marking categories, then you'll get the sum total of those categories. And you can also mix and match and mark individual entries. and the results will be that grand total of everything you've marked. Let's go ahead and take a look at an individual profile, organization profile. And as you can see, it has the expected fields, organization name and address. This is where you can select categories. And if you and your partner cannot agree on exactly which category this organization belongs on, the good news is that it can belong to both. And it's still the same information. It's a single profile. If you go to edit the profile from any one of these categories, you're still coming to the same place, and you only have to modify it once. You don't have to modify it once per category. This overall list of organizations, I should mention, and contacts, the relationship here is that the organization is the company, the contact is the person who works there. So the organization might be a senior living center, and the contact might be the director of marketing at that senior living center. And the overall list of organizations is divided up into resources, people where you recommend them, like say a plumber, but you don't necessarily spend money from your company with them. But the other part of that list is the vendors where you do spend money, and you can mark them as such using this checkbox. That way, when you go to enter your expenses and we give you a list of vendors, it's not going to be every organization, including people who you just recommend. It's limited to just the ones where you spend money, the vendors. And here you can also enter or upload files, and we have tasks and notes and calls for this section as well. So if a senior living center gives you a PDF of their standard floor plans, this is a standard place where everybody can go to find it. This particular organization has a contact, so they're listed here, and the edit button would take you to their information if you need to edit them. Moving on to the contacts section, it's pretty much the same situation. It starts off categorized, and you can open any one of them up for editing, and you can export it in the same way. Let's take a look at a profile. There are a couple of fields I'd like to point out, particularly here. One of which is act as client rep. So if this was an attorney, you might want to have this check marked, so they'll appear in the list when you're working with clients and inquiries. And you have that drop-down list of client reps. You can make them appear by checking here. The other button to point out is refers business to us. So if this contact sends business your way, you can go ahead and check mark them. And that, in conjunction with the last contacted field, which is a date, will be used by the system in another section to help you keep in touch with them. And in the same way as an organization allows you to upload files and create tasks, notes, and calls, the contacts section lets you do that as well. So those are our organizations and contacts section. It's our shortest part of the tour. From here, we'll move on to calendars, tasks, notes, and calls. Start off with tasks. Right now, I've moved over to a job. There's a few existing tasks in place for this job. If this was late, where it was past its due date but not finished, then it would be in red. The date would be in red. See what it's like. Let's take a look at what it's like to create a new task. So we have a due date. You can give it a priority. You can assign it to somebody in the company. And then there's a short summary and a longer description field. Later on, you'll come back and mark this as being finished, but for right now, we're just creating it. There's the task we just created. And over time, when you've entered a lot of tasks into the system, you will notice that you're creating similar tasks on a regular basis. And you may want to find a way to create multiple tasks at once. And we call those task groups. Next to this line, add a task group. Each one of these is a button that represents multiple tasks. So we'll go over to this one, and it represents 1, 2, 3 tasks. And by doing it this way, it provides, it helps you with consistency, because you wind up with, you start off with a list of all the tasks for that particular section, and if you don't need one, you can remove one. So now we only have 2 tasks, as opposed to trying to remember all the tasks and running the risk of forgetting one. So it's better to have the full list and then drop some. This also helps with consistency in the wording, because you'll have a starting point and maybe just need to tweak it. And that also is helpful to have things worded the same way, more or less. So moving on to notes. Notes are simpler. They just have the summary field and the description field. And returning to the listing of notes, you can see that we are keeping track of when the note was entered and by who. So over time, it builds up a history for you. Also, if you ever want to print it out, even as though we try to avoid paper, it still is often the case that we want to print out things. You can click on the full notes button. It'll generate this pop-up, and this will have the full description and summary of all your notes. When you go to print it, it's black and white. And there's a similar button and functionality for tasks and for calls. Moving on to calls, let's take a look at a new call. And they're kind of similar to tasks, but in this case you care about whether the call is inbound or outbound, and of course you need a phone number. If the call came in randomly as opposed to something that was planned, you'll just enter the date. You don't need reminders. If this is a plan in the future, or this is a call in the future that you're planning, then you can go ahead and put a future date for the call. And then you go ahead and set reminder dates. So on. From here, I'd like to go to the home page. I've mentioned before the idea of a status board. We have 2 of them, one for operations for your jobs, and we have another one for sales. And if you open up the one for jobs, you can see that we have our flags of good, flag, and alert, green, yellow, and red. The thinking here is that this gives you the 30,000-foot view of how your company's doing. At the end of the day, you can scroll through this list, and everything in green is something you can probably ignore for the moment. If something's in yellow, maybe it needs attention soon. If it's in red, maybe it needs attention right away. And these values were set as part of the job. Looking at the status board for sales, these are currently using the approach of cold lead, medium lead, and hot lead. But again, for both of these, the set of tags can be whatever you want. There can be 5 tags, not 3. You can change the labels, you can change the colors. I would also like to mention that the different sections on this page do not necessarily appear for every user. Some of these are for administrators only, like this one, status board. There are other sections which do appear for each user, and they're customized for that user, whoever you're logged in as, and they all begin with the word my. So my tasks, my calls, and opening that up, these are all tasks that are assigned to me, and you can see that a few of them are late, so they're in red. And you can edit them from here. The next section is called All Unfinished Tasks. So this is company-wide, and this one does not appear for every user. This is meant for managers to see how the company is doing. You can see how many tasks are in the system, how many of them are in red, and it gives you a sense of whether your company is keeping up or falling behind. And when you want to know if a task is finished, rather than make you look through this list of all the unfinished tasks and try to pick it out, we do give you concrete confirmation that the task is done. What the system does is it looks for anything that was closed within the last 5 days and shows it to you here. That way you have a sense of what's been done recently. So next we have My Calls. So again, these lists are customized for the calls that are assigned just to me. And you remember for the invoices, I mentioned that team leads would approve them. And if you are listed as team lead on a given job and then it has an invoice, that invoice will appear here so that you know that you have something to go and review and approve. Moving down to the next sections, this one is called Hourly and Expense Items for My Approval. So if I was the team lead, and this is an optional feature within SMMware. This is in addition to the approval for the invoices. This one is approval for the hourly and expense items before they can appear on an invoice. And we'll go ahead and look at what it's like to improve items. You come to this command, and we can set the filter, and we'll find the items that are, you don't have to use the filter, you can show all the unimproved items. I just wanted to limit it to one particular job for now. And you just basically review this, and if you approve, you can check mark it. And if you don't approve, you can offer a reason for why. And after you have rejected these, whoever the employee was who made the entry will have that item appear here under My Hourly and Expense Items for Revision. And they can edit that. And then the item will bounce back and forth between me revising it and the other person approving it or rejecting it until there's an agreement on what the item should be. The next section conveniently shows you which jobs you are listed as the team lead. And it's common that a given person will act as a team lead on some jobs and as a team member on other jobs. And this helps you to keep track of what's on your plate between the two of them. The next section, My Teams as Member. Moving on, this is a section for managers referring contacts that are most stale. And when we're looking at contacts, I showed you a button for who refers business to you. And when you come to this list, the system finds the contacts who refer business to you where it's been the longest since you've spoken to them. And then the idea here is that you work through this list and you can go to their profile, you contact them, you update it, and then you come back here and make sure that the date of last contact is relatively recent for all your contacts. And in this way, you avoid a situation where they are mad at you about something and you're not hearing from them, and then if you take too long to respond or to notice, then they're mad at you about that. So if you work this list, then you'll never run into that situation. Okay, the next section, 10 clients willing to act as a reference. This is for someone who's going to do sales work. And you go into the client and they ask for references, and here's 10 who are going to have been recent, as long as you keep the system up to date. So you look through this list, and then you can go to their profile and get their details to offer to the client. The next section is the one that you use to keep the first one current. These are all clients where the job has now been completed, but you have not yet asked them if they're willing to act as a reference. So if you work this list, then you'll guarantee that the first one is always fresh. And now this brings us to our homepage calendar, which is limited to events that I am a part of, either as the main contact or as an attendee. So I'm not looking at the entire company's worth of events on this one, because this is my schedule. But to see the events for the entire company, we'll go to the master calendar, go to admin, master calendar. And now you're seeing everything for the whole company. And we've set some colors elsewhere, which are then used here. And clicking on this clicking on a given item generates the pop-up. I know that there are some calendars that generate one entry for each employee for each thing they're doing. Within SMMware, we are generating one entry for each event, which might have multiple people attending. Looking at this particular event, we can see that there are 3 people. One is attending 2 to 5, one from 1 till 5, and the other one from 1 till 6. On this pop-up, I'd also like to point out that there is a map link. In this case, I had a fake address in there, 123 4th Street, so it didn't go anywhere meaningful, but normally it would. There's also a link at the bottom that takes you to the job profile, so you can review that. Let's go ahead and start a new event. At the top, we have a place to set a tag. And if this event is associated with a job, then you can pick that, and then you select the actual job. It can also be associated with a client or inquiry, or with a given associate. And then there are 6 custom fields that we can set, 6 custom tags. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and pick a job. I'm looking for one that has an address set. Not all of them do. There's one. So if the job has addresses set, it'll have this button, Insert Current Address. And if this is a job where they're moving and the address has already been set, there'll be a second button saying Insert the New Address. Clicking on that puts a short code into the description, which then becomes the hyperlink that I showed you on the main calendar. This drop-down is where you set who the contact is. When you set up your attendees, they will get emails, and at the bottom of the email, it'll say that if you have questions, here's who you talk to, and it'll provide an email address and a phone number, and of course the name. And that information is determined by who you have set in the drop-down. You can also set a couple of reminders, and you can set a color. I showed you before where you can put a color in for the clients and also for the job. SMMware has a hierarchy for the colors. So there is a default color for the master calendar, but that can be overridden by the color that you set in the client's profile. And that color can be overridden by one that's set for the job. And then finally, if you set a color here in the event, that will override everything else. Now we'll talk about attendee management. SMMware offers 3 different ways. The first one is called Direct, and it is the simplest. It provides you with a list of employees. You pick them, and when you save, they'll get an email, and this is an assignment as opposed to an invitation process. The thinking here is that you've already had a conversation with them, and you've agreed that they're going to do the work for this particular event. So you just need SMMware to formalize the information for you and make it appear in the calendar. You don't need SMMware to help you figure out who's going to attend. The second approach is called Invite, and we offer you a respond by date because we know that you can't expect people to respond the moment you send out the invitation, but you also don't want them responding half an hour before the event starts. So the respond by date appears in their invitation email, and it will prod them to make a decision within a reasonable time frame. The next field for team size, we can put in, if you run your company on a first come first served basis, maybe you need 3 people, you put in 3, and you can invite everybody. And then the first 3 people who respond will get a message saying, okay, your response has been recorded. The next people after that will get a message saying, I'm sorry, the team is full. Now, if you don't run your company like that, you can put in a larger number. The number is not part of the email, so no one's going to ask you why you think it's going to take this many people to run the event. But having a higher number does prevent anybody from getting rejected. And once you do that, you can use the invitation process in a couple different ways. You can invite, let's say you need 3 people, you invite 6 of them, and then 5 of them are interested and say that they can do the work. And then you can pick, during the assignment phase, you can pick 3 of them based on trying to spread the work around, or by matching the person who has the skills for the situation. Maybe it's fragile items and some people are better at packing them, or maybe some people are better with a difficult client, whatever your criteria might be. And another way you can use the invitation system, again assuming that you need 3 people, you might have 3 people in mind as your first picks, and you invite the 3 of them, and one of them cannot make it, and they respond saying that they have to decline. And then you come back here and you can add another one and send out that round of invitations, and they'll be the only one who gets the email, and so they'll have their invite. So you can have rounds of invitations until you have 3 people who are interested in doing the work. This next approach is called availability. And before we go into detail there, I'm going to show you where employees can enter their availability. Under this command call, it's under Associates and My Unavailability. We can set the system where employees are entering, they can describe when they can work either based on when they are available or when they are unavailable. And it's probably easier to, or in my experience so far, it's been easier to enter when they're not available. And since I'm an administrator, I can manage the unavailability for anybody. If I was a regular employee, I could only manage my own. Going back to the actual calendar, the unavailability gets translated into when they are available. So if I'll go back a couple days, you can see that this person has said they were not available in the morning, so that chunk has been taken out. And I'll go to, say, Tuesday. So on Tuesday, this person cannot work in the morning, but everybody can work in the afternoon. But we want to work in the morning, so we'll set 3 people. You just pick them. And now we have a red shift bar. And this is the part where you can just drag it and drop it to the start and end time that you need. And they do not have to be the same start and end time. See, in this case, I'll just set it where the idea is that 3 people are on site packing, and then the moving van shows up, and 1 person sticks around to supervise the moving van people. Once you are finished picking your people, go ahead and hit save. And they get their notification emails. Now, since they have already made you a promise, the employees have made you a promise that they can work on these dates, this is really an assignment as opposed to an invitation process. After you have assigned them, things might change. So let's say that somebody is sick. So not only can they not work on this event, they can't work on any other. You come back, and where it says assigned, you click on it once, and it says released. And then when we hit save, it's going to take out that chunk altogether. Now, on the other hand, if you needed 4 people, or at least you thought you needed 4 people for this event, and it turns out you only need 3, then we're going to remove somebody, but we don't want them to be, we still want to consider them for other jobs that come up. So instead of saying released, you click on it a second time, and they are returned to the pool of availability. So you can see this missing chunk where this person was removed because they were sick. And you can see this person has been returned to availability. So you can assign them on another job. Going back to the master calendar, one of the ways that we help you with planning, we have this button, Include Availability. This is a filter section at the bottom. Now we have these light green entries, and it tells you, first of all, how many people have some availability that day, 5 people, 6 people, 7. But that's not enough information to know when you can create the event. You need to know how much availability they have. So you click on that, you get a pop-up, and it provides the details of who can work when. Here's one where there's a little bit of difference. The other one showed 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. for everybody, but in this case, this person can only work in the afternoon. And then this person is missing a chunk starting at 2 p.m. So that is something that helps you with planning. And that is our introduction to calendaring. So again, this section 3, we covered calendars, we covered tasks, notes, and calls. For our final section, we're going to talk a little bit about integrations with MailChimp and with QuickBooks. So we'll go to look at a client. And this system has been integrated with MailChimp. At MailChimp, we have 3 different lists that we can integrate with. One of them is for clients and inquiries. One of them is for contacts, and the third one is for employees. So yeah, if you never ever need to mass mail the employees, you can do that from here as well. And I'll go ahead and put in an email address. And when I save it, it is going to go to MailChimp and either add, in this case there wasn't an email address, so it added a new email address to my list. And if I had modified the email address, it would update it for us. And that's the extent of the MailChimp integration. So when you go to send out a mass email, you can skip the step where you have to synchronize your MailChimp list with what you have within SMMware, because that will have been done on the fly every time you made a modification. From here, we'll go ahead and talk about QuickBooks integration. You can see that this is where you go to make a connection, but we already have one set up. Within SMMware, we have a command under Associates for My Hours, Expenses, and Mileage History. And the normal practice is, this is used for payroll. You come here, you set it, you pick an employee. Normally you'd leave the job set to all jobs, and you'd set a date range that corresponds to a payroll period. Then you generate a list of items. The green circle with QB in it means that this has already been copied over to QuickBooks. The button QBO add means that it has not. Under normal circumstances, these would all be new entries, and they would all need to be copied over. And the typical situation is to use this button, QBO add all, so then you can copy all of these at once instead of one at a time. So SMMware does allow you to copy one at a time, but on a normal basis you'd use this button, QBO add all. Also, if the client is new, SMMware is smart enough to realize that, and before it copies over the hours, it will copy over the new client. Because when SMMware talks to QuickBooks, it can't just say 5 hours of work was done. It has to say that it was done by a certain employee and for a certain client. And if the employee was new, they would be copied over as well. In this case, I'm just going to copy over one entry. And it is as straightforward as that. You can see that there are no errors, and it tells you that it copied over the 3 hours. So now I'm going over to QuickBooks, and I'm going to use the audit log, and you can see that we created the time activity. And this time activity looks just like a time activity that was created directly within QuickBooks. It sometimes happens that you might like to copy over the underlying entities. So there's a relationship that's kind of like a pyramid where invoices are at the top. Below that are the entries for hours and expenses, and below that, at the bottom level of the pyramid, you have the clients, the employees, and vendors. So sometimes you might want to copy over the client directly, and SMMware does let you do that. We provide a QBO add button for the clients and for the vendors, and also for the employees. So that is the approach of copying over items for payroll, but you can also copy over invoices. You can see that we provide a QBO add button for the individual invoices. These have already been copied over, and you can see that button from within the invoice itself as well. From here, I'm going to go over to another instance of SMMware. This is one that is set up for working with QuickBooks Desktop. And it is a similar situation. I've come over to the hours, expense, mileage history. And I've got an hours entry that I'll go ahead and copy over. The process with QuickBooks Desktop is a little bit different than QuickBooks Online. It's a two-step process. First, we add things to the queue within SMMware. And then this is a list within SMMware of items that are ready to be copied over to QuickBooks Desktop. And you can see what's in the queue. And you can actually also delete it. So if you had something in the queue and you realize you didn't want to copy it over, you can undo that. So after something's been added to the queue within SMMware, you can go into QuickBooks Desktop. You use something called the Web Connector. And for right now, there's various details involved, but I just wanted to give you a sense of the experience of what it's like to work with on a day-to-day basis. So again, this is the Web Connector. We make sure that this is checkmarked, which represents the connection between SMMware and this QuickBooks Desktop. Then we click on Update Selected. You can watch the process right here. And it's complete. Now I'm just going to go back and see what the date was on that. 11/17. So I'll go to entering time. And I will look for that person. Maybe that wasn't the right person. I'd have to go back and look at that, but the entry would normally appear here, showing you who the work was done for, which employee, and the grand total for hours and so on. But that is the experience with QuickBooks Desktop. You can also work with invoices here, and also with you can work with the clients and vendors and associates, copying them over to QuickBooks as well. And that brings us to the end of the tour generally. If anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and ask them whenever you're ready. Meanwhile, I'll just mention that if anyone was ready to sign up for a subscription, you can go over to SMMware.com to the pricing section. Our pricing is $45 a month total for up to 10 active users, or $50 a month for 20, $55 for 30. There is no annual contract or setup fees, and we're offering first 30 days free and free training. And you can also go to the company section under testimonials to see comments from other users. And to talk about future development for SMMware, we're going to be adding a file sharing feature mid-December, maybe a little bit earlier. So that way you can share images and other things with either your clients or your contacts at your vendors. And like I said, that'll be hopefully mid-December, and you'll be able to start using that. So that about sums it up for me. And if any questions come up after we're off the webinar, you can go to SMMware.com. You'll find the phone number here, 240-285-4619. And of course, we have a contacts section on the website. So thank you very much for your time and attention tonight, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the evening, and we hope to talk to you soon. So everybody have a good night. Okay, thank you.